You can see from your bulletin, the title of today's sermon is The Land of the Giants. Land of the Giants. I don't know if any of you remember the old TV show, Land of the Giants. I see William does, yes, and I know Chris probably did. I know how sci-fi he is. Yes, Jonathan actually. Yeah, okay. Remember that. I only saw one show of that when I was a kid. And I remember this dog chasing this little person around. So that's the only thing I remember. But the TV show was actually put together. It's only on for a few years. And the TV show started in 1968. And at that time, they put the date of when this was happening in 1983. Because in 1968 we were doing space travel, we'd gone to the moon, all these things were visions that, oh wow, then everything's going to be accelerated now and we'll just go all over. So instead of airplanes flying this one, the very first show, instead of an airplane flying you from Los Angeles to London, it was like a spaceship that would get up into the atmosphere or above the atmosphere and fly over, and they could make it in 30 minutes or whatever. Well, in 1983, of course, you know that didn't happen. But also from the TV show, you also realize that they got thrown off course and they landed on a planet that's out there somewhere where it looked just like Earth. Everything's like Earth, except everything was 12 times its size than it was on Earth. So of course these people landed in this airplane spaceship, and of course the dogs were 12 times bigger than they are here on Earth. So everything was bigger. And so then they showed their story of survival as from one week to the next there was some new adventure, and or some person would actually kidnap one of them and hold them in their hands and so forth like this. So I remember that as a kid because I always thought about it, because even though we didn't go to church very often, hardly ever, when I was growing up, I do remember the story of David and Goliath. It was my favorite story in the Bible at the time, although I don't think my parents ever read it to me. But if you remember that story that is laid out for us, we find that the giant Goliath, as the Bible describes it, is 6 cubits and a span, which was actually giving his height at somewhere between 9'6" and 9'9" tall. That's a big giant. And when you consider that this 15 to 16-year-old kid named David, a little shepherd boy, was probably about half his size, being most, they know that the average Jewish man at the time of Jesus Christ's death was about 5'2" to 5'3", a lot shorter than they are today. Which also tells us by that time, David would have probably been barely 5 foot tall. So you can imagine going up to fight in a war to somebody this height. Would be like Joseph and myself. Can you imagine what it took for you to walk out onto a battlefield with someone twice your size, probably weighed 5 times what you did? Yet David was fearless. The whole country, all the great military men, Saul to Abner to everyone who was there, his brothers, they were scared when this Goliath came out, and their hands shook and they were like, And yet, here was this skinny little kid that walked out there and faced him. Fearless. Talk about faith, he talked about. Really had to have a lot. Now, why do I bring this up? Because sometimes we are required to battle giants. Giants in this world. Giants in this land. And sometimes it requires as much faith in God as David had. But we will sometimes say, well, no, I don't know that I could walk out onto a battlefield and face this 9 foot, almost 10 foot tall, 500, 600 pound giant. That's not your battle. But yet God likes to see us look towards Him as He gives us battles to fight in this country we live in today. Giants were first mentioned in the Bible, Genesis 6 and verse 4. This talks about the Nephilim. And I won't go into the theology of it. I'll do some other time where you can actually get on the internet and Google this, and they'll tell you how angels came down and had relations with men and women, and then these giants came about. But that's not really how it is, being Christ actually told us that when we're spirit beings, we'll be like the angels who neither marry or given in marriage. But it actually said there were giants on the earth in those days and also afterwards when the Son of Man. So there are actually giants before they even describe what's mentioned in Genesis 6 and verse 4. So there were giants on the earth. Giants that existed when man was first put here. Giants that, well, they weren't here when Adam was here, but they came from man, and they became giants, and they were known to be mighty men. Actually, the actual word Nephilim from the Hebrew actually means tyrant. Tyrant, or bully. So it can be giant in other ways, but we also knew they were giant in stature, as the Bible actually points out. So, why would God want His people, not only at that time, to have to deal with that, but even after the flood? As we know from even Nimrod, who was a huge, considered a giant in his day, huge, strong man. And afterwards, many giants. If you will turn with me to Numbers 13. Let's look at a couple of these cases. Numbers 13, as we see the children of Israel came out of Egypt, where they were brutalized and kept as slaves. But here we see that God is going to have them come up against giants. Giants. So here in Numbers 13, verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel from each tribe of their fathers. You shall send a man, every one a leader among them. So Moses sent them out from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them who were heads of the children of Israel. And as you see, they go into this promised land, and it's more than they could ever dream about. It's exactly what God had said. It was a land of milk and honey. It actually had cities already built. It had vineyards that were already growing. It had cattle. It had stock. It had everything you could dream of. And all they were doing, you give them one instruction. Go in and take it. I'm going to give it to you. So the men all went around and looked at it. And then in verse 25, said, and they returned from spying out the land after 40 days, so they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation in the wilderness of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. They carried this huge grapes and various things there that was grapes the size of basketballs. It was just, was more than they could ever dream about. Then they told him and said, we went to this land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak. Anak was father of the giants. We saw Anak there. And go down to verse 30. And because you see there that they told that, and all of a sudden the people are like, ah! What are we going to do? Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it were men of great stature. There we saw giants. The descendants of Anak came from giants. And we were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Huh? And in the eyes of the giants. Grasshoppers. A little hyperbole, I believe. Even the Land of the Giants TV show was only 12 times. But here they're saying, well, these are 150 to 200 times their size. Go with me to Deuteronomy 3. Deuteronomy 3, verse 3. As we see that God is now with people, tell them what he'd do. And so here, one of the last, the king of Bashan, his name was Og. He was the last of the giants of this same group, last of Anak. And so he said, I want you to go in, I want you to take Og's land, and I want you to kill everybody in there. And you're going to take over his property. Thing was, Og was such a powerful leader that he was over 60 cities. This was a huge territory he had. He was a big man. But God said, go in. Face the giants. And I'm going to tell you, the land of the giants, after you go in, will no longer be the land of the giants. It's going to be yours. So in verse 3, Deuteronomy 33, so the Lord our God also delivered into our hands Og, the king of Bashan, with all his people, and we attacked him until he had no survivors remaining. Verse 11, for only Og, the king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. Indeed, his bedstead was an iron bedstead, 9 cubits in length and 4 cubits in width, according to the standard, which was a 13 by 6 bed. I mean, he was pretty tall.
What that mean?
Then we see in verse 13, the rest of Gilead and all Bashan, the king of Og, I gave to the half-tribe of Manasseh. All the region of Argob, with all Bashan, was called the land of the giants. So everybody knew it was the land of the giants. But it didn't take giants to go in and conquer giants. And that's the point that God was trying to make with all of them. In verse 18, Deuteronomy 3 and verse 18. And I commanded you at that time, saying, the Lord your God has given you this land to possess. All you men of valor, cross over, armed before your brethren, the children of Israel, but your wives and your little ones, your livestock. I know that you have much lives that stay in the cities which I have given you. And go on down to verse 21. I commanded Joshua the same. Your eyes have seen all that the Lord has done to these two kings. So will the Lord do to all of the kingdoms through which you pass. You must not fear them. For the Lord your God himself fights for you. I'll take care of it. I got your back. And I'm pretty big. Now, one last thing as we go over to Joshua, as we finish with the story of these giants. They do not pop up again for a little while. Joshua 14, verse 10. Joshua 14 and verse 10. And we have Caleb speaking here. As God is actually giving Caleb the land in Canaan, the promised land, he's giving him the land of the giants. Where the giants are, it's their stronghold, and he's sending Caleb, who originally spied it out 45 years earlier, and said, let's go in and get them. He had to wait. Now he's sending in Caleb, and he says, this is going to be your land, and all your family. It's your inheritance, and it's beautiful land. Oh. So here, this 85-year-old man says in verse 10 of Joshua 14, and now behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, for 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses while Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now here I am, this day, 85 years old. As yet, I am as strong this day as I was on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going in and coming out. Well, I hope at 85 I can be as strong as I was in 40. I can tell you I'm 58 and I'm not as strong as I was when I was 40. So God's got to do something. I'm not like Caleb. He said in verse 12, now therefore give me this mountain on which the Lord spoke in that day. For you have heard in that day how the Anakim, the giants, were there, and that the cities were great and fortified. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out, as the Lord said. And Joshua blessed Caleb and gave Caleb Hebron as his inheritance. And Hebron therefore became the inheritance of Caleb, because he wholly followed the Lord God of Israel. And the name of Hebron, formerly Kiriath Arba, for Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, the giants. Then the land had rest from war. So he got rid of the giants, he had no more problem. His family didn't have any problem. Other people had problems because they didn't do what God asked him to do. But how many giants have you faced in your lifetime? Quite a few. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I remember the first time I ever thought I ran into a giant. I was 14 and a half years old. It was between a freshman and a sophomore in high school, and I was sent to went to a basketball camp that was pretty prestigious at the time. Cost a lot of money. And I went there, and I was 5 foot 10 inches tall as a freshman. And so when I went there, I was made to play with and put with guys from all over the country. And they stuck me being 5 foot 10 in with the guys who were 6'6" and 6'8", and I think the tallest one was 6'9". Some of them were all Americans. They went to North Carolina. They went to various colleges. As you can tell, they were very good. I was not. But I got to look at the coaches as they put us there with them. And here I am, and this guy is almost a foot taller than me, weighs 60, 70 more pounds than I am. And he said, Darty. And I'm like, all I can do is just look in amazement, put my hand up, and the guys did this. And I remember we had one coach, they don't allow that anymore. I remember one coach, I'm just kind of in awe, and he comes up and kicks me as hard as he can in my tail end with his center sheet. Almost knocks me down. Are you a man?
No.
at the time. But he asked that. Be a man. Give it your best effort, your best shot. It's not what you're doing. Yeah, but how do I? Are you bigger than they are? No. Are you faster than they are? Doesn't look like it. Well, you are. But I so remember being so intimidated, looking up all the time at that. Until the end of camp, and then we actually had a 3-on-3 championship, and our team actually went to the finals and learned how to guard somebody that big, and if you couldn't beat them, you made their life miserable. But it's the first time I remember thinking I was in the land of giants. But let's go and read that story about David. As what little time we have left here, I'd like you to go to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel 17. Most of you know it and say, well, why do we need to go and look again? Because it's such an inspiring story that no matter where you watch sports or whatever, and you have a great team and one that's not so great, you even hear a David and Goliath reference. And so, since the world used this, I think we can use it even more. As we see this young man, 15, 16 years old, go out onto the battlefield in chapter 17, 1 Samuel 17 and verse 21. It said, for Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army, and David left his supplies in the hand of a supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were dreadfully afraid. Grown men. Maybe they need somebody to kick them in the tail. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich him with great riches and will give his daughter and give his father's house exemption in Israel. You never have to pay taxes again. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine who should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him and said, so shall it be for the man who kills him. Now Eliab, you have to remember Eliab, the oldest of David's brothers. Shebna, Eliab, they were the ones that Samuel had gone to. God had said, and the next king comes here, and surely Jesse go, oh, it's got to be Eliab. Well, he's the biggest, he's the strongest, he's the oldest. It's got to be him. Samuel looks up, not him. Then the next son, and then the next son. You think they didn't remember this? They were thinking, all of a sudden, they overlook us, and here's this little runt. Now he not only is an embarrassment when we're out at the farm, it's an embarrassment now that this kid that was supposed to deliver supplies, he's embarrassing us, and just like, well, who is this folks? Don't you anybody stand up? You know they had to say, you little punk. Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left all those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and your insolence of your heart, for you have come down here to see the battle. All you wanted was entertainment. And David said, what have I done now? So obviously, guess what? Kind of used to that. Anybody who's a runt in the family kind of gets that, right? I don't know if any of you ever... Yes? Yes. Is this not a cause? Then he turned from him towards the others and said the same thing, and these people answered him as the first ones did. And when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul. And he sent for this kid. Then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go, and I'll fight against the Philistine. And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go up against a Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he's been a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep a father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it, struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I took a sling and I put a rock in it and I killed it." No. He said, "I grabbed it by the beard." A 700-800-pound bear? 500-pound lion? And he reaches and grabs it and kills it? Talk about living faith. So he's looking at it and going, "Well, that's a decent sized guy, but bear was pretty good size too." Bring it on. And I'm sure Saul was amazed at this. Amazed at the sight of hearing him. And he said, "Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing that he has defied the armies of the living God." Moreover, David said, "The Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, He, God, will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to him, "Go, and the Lord be with you." We'll finish it up in 40 through 46. So then David took his staff in his hand and chose for himself 5 small stones from the brook, and he put them in a shepherd's bag and in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David. And the man who bore the shield went with him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy, good-looking, but a runt. So the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come with me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me. Come to me. And I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." And this 16-year-old runt said, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you, and I will take your head from you." Is that confidence?
Yes, amen.
Then I'm sure Goliath was kind of like, "This kid's crazy. This is not a dog, this is a mad dog that wants to do this. This day I will give the carcass of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts, that all on earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hands." And of course, we know that He did. We've looked at the biblical history of giants. And you may say sometimes, "Well, what do you mean that I fight giants like that?" Today we live in the land of giants. We come face to face with giants of this land monthly, weekly, and sometimes even daily. Financial giants. Yes? Financial giants. Some of the richest people in the world. They have more billionaires live in the state of Florida than any other state. Millionaires, so many you can't even count. Banks, financial institutions, even giant corporations can become landlords. And many times your landlord is a corporate financial giant. And they do control the finances of this world. Political giants who make laws and raise taxes. Government giants who can threaten you, have you jailed, and you have to prove your innocence. They don't even have to prove you're guilty. Political giants like the IRS. Laugh because they're not something to play with. They are serious. Very serious. ICE. Very serious. They don't play. They just throw you in jail or dump you in some other country. I remember the IRS, when I had my business, kept having this auditors come in. We're supposed to audit you every 5 years. That's what they said. Well, I was getting audited every other year.
Workman's comp.
Workman's comp, yes. And I kept thinking, what's going on? And then all of a sudden, they changed to every year. And I knew that wasn't the statute that was in there. And I actually called, and they said, well, no, you shouldn't come up. I said, well, the last time the guy was here and audited me over payroll of $100,000, and he ended up saying I missed $59.62. And he spent 3 days going through our books. How profitable is that? They said, well, we can't do anything about it. So here he was, back the next year. Same thing. And I knew they had the power. You turn your books over to them or they just seize everything. There's no government power. I finally had to go down. I actually prayed about it because I'm going, man, is this going to happen every time? Because it takes so much time, your books and everything. I actually made an appointment with the head of the state of Tennessee. Walked in there, sat down with him, spent time, built a rapport, and he said, I'm sorry this even happened to you. And he removed everything. Never was audited again before I sold the company. Now, was it me? When I walked out of that building, I knew. I knew. Because I had been praying many times a day that God would help me. And He did deliver. Now, some people say, oh, well, that's part. No. We need to know. If you follow this God, He's my giant. I can walk in anywhere with my giant. And I expect my giant, when I do everything I can, to help me and to fight my battles. And I hope you view it the same way. How about hospital giants? Where the bottom line is more important many times than human life. Mike Fushi, who was here once before. Mike is a accountant, started as a CPA, but he also was a CFO for quite a few different hospital corporations. And it's amazing how many times he got fired. When they asked him to sign off where they had had different owners in the companies ripping off the government, ripping off people for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he had to go to court a couple of times afterwards when those guys were prosecuted, and he was actually a former employee. But when they found out that he wouldn't change the numbers, when he wouldn't work and caress all the numbers to make it look good, guess what? You're out. You're fired. Police departments. They're paid so little for what they do. Makes me ask, boy, why do you do it? Too many in this area down here are corrupt. Every few months you see a story where some police have taken his credentials. They've taken it because he's been so corrupt. Maurice told a story about driving a Corvette. Thankfully he walked out of that. If he hadn't had a giant and was planning on his future, he may not have. We have to be very careful. We have to, as Marie said, we have to show the utmost of respect, which I always do. I do anything they ask me to do. But if I get pulled over, I want to make sure that before they come to my car, I'm talking to my giant. And I'm talking to my God. Care who you are today. Corporate giants. How about your job? You know, people today in various corporations is so written up, they can push and bully you around at various jobs. Why can they do that? Why do they do that? Because they can. Because they have laws written so that they can. And brethren, it gets worse every year. Turn around and see more giants popping up. The bottom line, by living in the land of the giants, like David, like Caleb, we, brethren, are to live righteously. We're to follow God. We're to follow His Word, believe in Him, and love Him with all of our heart, mind, soul, and being. And then let God take care of the giants. We have to. Let God take care of the giants who come up against us. Because once we do everything we can and we follow God, obey God, we've done our part. It's time that we let go. David believed, Caleb believed, and giants fell. Giants were slain. No matter the giant or giants. And even comes health care. Who knows what's going to happen now? We don't know. They don't know. We've got a mess now. We may have a bigger mess down the road. We don't know. So what do? Let go and let God. Let go and let God. Let God handle it. And He said, don't worry. And if we see the examples from this book of a kid 15 to 16 years old standing before a 10-foot giant, fearless. And we see an 85-year-old man who said, I'm just as strong as I was 40 years ago. Standing before a giant, saying, come on, big boy. I'll handle it. We see that. They were fearless because they knew God had their back. And it's the same mindset we should have. No matter where we are. No matter what we confront. The same mindset we must have. That's why it's in here. They were God's people. We are God's people. They were fearless. Are we that fearless? We should be. You know, difficulties usually provide a platform on which God stands. And He displays His power and sovereignty. Do we realize that? Let's go back. Go back to Psalm. Psalm 50. Psalm 50 and verse 15. I want each one of you to think in your own mind. Perhaps there's a giant in your future. Perhaps there's one right now. I want you to look at this. I read from the New King James Version. Psalm 50, verse 15, he says, call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you will glorify me. Why is He going to deliver you? So that you can glorify Him and not say, well, I took care of that guy, didn't I? Well, I told that cop off. Well, man, I'll tell you what, I told that president of the bank what he could do with his loan. No. Guess what? He's saying, call on me. God is challenging us to call on Him. Call upon me in the day of trouble. You know, trouble comes in varying degrees. He didn't say, oh, call on me when something big happens. No. He says, call on me in the day of trouble. Because I don't want my children, I don't want my people to have to worry. I don't want you losing sleep. I don't want you missing a meal. And I will deliver you, and you will glorify me. Powerful verse. Something you may need to mark in your Bible and go to this week or the next one. See, you and I both need faith. Faith is a higher power. Faith in that higher power. Dr. Martin Luther King talked about this many years ago. And he said, you don't have to see the whole staircase. You just need to take the first step. You don't need to see all of it. Just take the first step. Powerful words. Hopefully we can. We can remember. So we must never be afraid to entrust our unknown future to an all-knowing God. We may not know what's down the road, but He does. That's why we don't have to worry. Andrew Murray, the theologian from about 100 years ago, made a statement one time in the same light, as he says, we have a God who delights in impossibilities. That's our God. When we say it's impossible, He delights in hearing that. Why? Because if it's impossible, we can't possibly say, well, we did the impossible, but we know who does. Because Jesus Christ said nothing. Nothing. Not one thing. But how many times you hear, oh, it's useless. Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. Oh, that's impossible. Oh, it's just me. I just have bad luck everywhere I turn. God's people don't have luck. We have faith, and we are blessed. Amen. Other people have luck. They need it. We don't need it. You know, it says by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses is word secured, delivered, in various ways to say it, established. But it's interesting that in the Old Testament, and it's actually in Genesis 18, you don't have to write them down, Jeremiah 32, there's a couple of verses in there. 3 times, God actually is quoted as saying, is anything too hard for me? Is anything too hard for me? He's just asking us. He's challenging us to take it to Him. And how many times we go, oh no, I got this. Said that many times, had to crawl back in the house. I ain't got this. We all have to learn, don't we? And that's what He wants us to do. To totally trust God shows incredible faith in a faithless world. Do you want to merely possess faith? Or do you want a faith that possesses you? I want a faith that possesses me. Amen. That I walk out every day with that faith. And I walk in, no matter where it's at. I'm walking with God. Am I perfect? Absolutely not. Just ask this woman on the front row. She's 24/7 Chuck. I can tell you I'm not perfect. But I know who is. And I know who gets me back on the right track. Jesus, can I get you to hand these out for me? Would you help him take one side? Pass those out on this side, if you don't mind passing these out on this side. Thank you, sir. I want you to take this home. This is your handout as we wrap this sermon up today. I want you to take this home This is the same verses put 7 different ways from 7 different translations. I'd like you to make this your homework this week. I'd like you to just take it home and read it. And read the different translations. Because this is such a powerful, powerful verse that we can end on. So I'd like you to go with me, if you don't, in Psalm 27. Psalm 27. Psalm 27 verse 1, I'll read from the New King James Version, which is not on there. And mine says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Psalm of David, we kind of get into that mindset of David. We need to be Davids. We need to be the Davids that walk on this earth, that walk in South Florida. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Who shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? How many times does God have to say? When the wicked come against me to eat up my flesh, my enemies and my foes, they stumble and they fall. Though an army should come up against me, my heart shall not fear. Forget what it says on your message. One is from the Message translation. Something that everyone had just a few words changed is from the translation. But it all tells us, brethren, that we are in a special place. We are in a special land. We are in the land of the giants. But we fear not. We're told not to fear. Told not to fear. The world has its giants, but we have ours. Just remember, brethren, our giant, our God. He even tells us just how big He is. So in case you wonder just how big your giant is, He wanted us to see. And I think about it all the time because it's Isaiah 66 verse 1. You don't have to turn there. Because He said, how big is our giant? How big is our God? He said this earth is His footstool. This earth is God's footstool. That's a giant. And you wonder what any man can do to you? This giant says he also owns the entire world. Everything is his. And you're worried about some financial difficulties? The earth is my footstool. The circumference of this earth is around 25,000 miles around. This earth that He owns 197 million square miles. That's your giant. That's your God. Brethren, that is a big giant. That's a big God. And He's ours.
Amen. Amen.
Let's make sure that we use our giant this week. That we use our God. No fear. But let Him know. Like David, like Caleb, like so many of you, we're going to be fearless.
Amen.